Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar, The European Context of Stationary Energy Storage and Details on the French Market. This is Molly Huang, Production Director of Leader Associates, joining you from Shanghai, China. Battery energy storage could be in gigawatts for any major electricity markets as renewable energy penetrates. However, the story has been a little bit different in Europe so far as we are concerned. And I believe that's why the webinar is designed here today for us to learn, discuss, and anticipate how the future goes. The webinar is jointly hosted by Leader Associates and Clean Horizon Consulting. There are a lot of interesting questions that come up during the pre-registration, such as the CRE tender, the bidding strategy, and the potential business opportunities for front-of-meter and behind-the-meter projects. These questions will be either addressed during the presentation or be answered in Q&A session later on. Also, as I mentioned earlier, today's webinar is not open for live stream, but we still have some audience here with us. You are most welcome, and thank you so much for your kind participation. Unfortunately, I have to mute all of you so as to ensure the voice quality, but please feel free to raise with any questions in the webinar console. Mention the Q&A session below and hit the send button. We will get back to you at the very end. An important note is that today's webinar is being recorded and we will send you all materials, preferably by the end of this week or latest next Monday. But that's no excuse for you to leave now. Before we get it started today, I'd like to take just 2 slides to briefly introduce who we are and what we do in Leader Associates. Leader Associates is a global event organizer in the field of clean energy. Although we are a young company founded in 2015, we have hosted more than 25 events across 5 continents, with major footprints in Southeast Asia, North Asia, Pacific, Africa, and last year in Rome, Italy for our very first Europe Solar Plus Energy Storage Congress, ESES 2019. Up to date, we are very honored to have a network of over 80,000 industry professionals covering solar, storage, and wind. And excited to share that 4 months from now on, our second edition of ESES will be coming to Paris of France, dated on June the 23rd to 24th. Currently, major storage business stakeholders like ENGIE, Enedis, ENLX, Vattenfall, E.ON, Zenobē have already confirmed to join us. Okay, no more sales pitch. I'd like to give the floor to our solo presenter of the day, Mr. Corentin Baschet. Mr. Corentin is the head of market analysis of Clean Horizon Consulting, and he's in charge of the overall research and market opportunity sizing up. Hi, Corentin. Can you hear me good right now?
Yes. Hi, Molly. Thanks for the great introduction. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you, and thank you so much for being here. First of all, may you do a brief introduction of who you are, what you do, and your company? Afterwards, please feel free to start your presentation.
Sure. So I think you did a great job at introducing myself. I just say that I've been working in energy storage for the past 4 years now, and that it's been very exciting times. And there's a bit of a feedback loop on your end, Molly. I don't know if you can hear it, but maybe if you can mute yourself, it would be improve the sound quality. So Clean Horizon, we're a consulting company dedicated to energy storage and funded 10 years ago. And yes, the only thing we do is energy storage, and I'm chairing the market analysis activities. And the other big part of our activities is on the technical consulting part, so which means that we are essentially owner's engineer for energy storage projects. We do size energy storage projects either for developers, investors, or financial advisors. On the market analysis side, there's 2 products I'd like to emphasize quickly on. One is a monthly report on the energy storage markets, and the other one is a database of energy storage projects worldwide, which is curated by ourselves and our experts. Thanks. So Molly, if you want to go to the agenda, except if you have anything to add.
No, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So the way we structured that is that we will start with an introduction on the European market, on energy storage. Then I will take you a bit more into a deep dive into the energy storage markets for France and the upcoming opportunities in France. Just as an introduction and the general picture, the UK is currently the leading opportunity for storage in Europe, with approximately 850 megawatts of storage installed. This is extracted from our database of projects, which tracks all the projects that are higher than 500 kilowatts in Europe. So you can see that there is a big pipeline in the UK with approximately 1.8 gigawatts of storage projects announced. The next biggest country is definitely Germany, with an installed capacity today of 428 megawatts. And France is actually the third. So Germany was the historic one. That's where the first storage systems were deployed in Europe. UK followed up in 2016, and hopefully France can be next. So what has driven this market uptake for most of these countries? The application for storage is ancillary services, but there are other revenues such as the capacity markets, which are detailed at the next slide. Molly, if you can get to the next slide. Yes, so the capacity markets are, there are several in Europe. The UK capacity market, there's been a lot of action in the past years because it was suspended and it's back in place now again, and the auctions have just started again. Ireland has its own capacity market. France has launched the capacity market 3 years ago now. And Italy has for the first time held its capacity market in the end of 2019, so a couple months ago, with 2 auctions. One which is for delivery in 4 years and one with delivery in 3 years. Regarding the capacity market structures, they are very different from a country to another. So Ireland and Italy have a market price mechanism, a strike price mechanism, which means that the capacity that was awarded the capacity market contract has to be online as soon as the market prices reach what is defined as the strike price, which is a market price at which the market is considered as stressed. The UK and France have a different approach with a specific alert day. So in the UK it's alert states, and in France we have specific days that are called for capacity markets, for capacity to be available. Belgium is also in the process of setting up its capacity market. Germany does not have a capacity market, even though they are procuring strategic reserves to ensure that there is enough capacity online from a year to another. So the capacity market is one of the drivers of storage. It's not the only one, but it helps a lot because it makes a good secondary revenue for an energy storage system. We are actually expecting today the results of the long-term tender for capacity market in France. Italy has shown interesting results with UK with 15 years contracts, even though the prices are not always the payment of these contracts are not as high as expected. They do exist, and it's a positive sign for the energy storage industry. Right, so that was for a short snapshot of what's happening in the EU today and the capacity markets. Now I go more into the news and what's been happening for the past couple of months, and then we'll go back to France more specifically. I'll start with Italy. I told you Italy has just launched its capacity market auction. What you can see on this next slide is the amount of capacity that was awarded. So there was 2 auctions. at the end of 2019, there was a T-3 and a T-4, so T3 and T4, which means that the capacities have to be delivered in 2022 or in 2020. Well, in 2032 for the first auction and for the second in 2023. The auction has some regional parameters, so that's why you can see that most of the capacity awarded was in the north of the country. Existing capacity has a 1-year contract, whereas new capacity has up to 15 years contracts. So this is 15 years contracts with payments in Italy as much as 75,000 euro per megawatt per year are seen, which is a very good opportunity to seize, and some storage projects have actually been awarded these contracts. Even though the derating factors today for storage are very unclear, because this technology is still quite new. So for pumped hydro, the framework is very clear, but for battery storage, it's quite unclear. But Italy is not only launching its capacity market, they have recently announced that they will procure storage because the Italian grid is facing stability issues. So that's what you can see on this slide. You see the graph shows the amount of load that is covered by synchronous machines. So you should understand when we say synchronous machines, conventional generation, because most of the conventional generation, so which is coal, gas, nuclear, even though there's not much in Italy, but all of these large generators are synchronous because they rotate at a speed which is proportional to the grid's frequency. And what Italy has, what the Italian TSO called Terna has shown is that in the future it's expected to have less and less hours per year during which the system will be running with 35% of inertia. And if I'm on your slide, so what Terna has decided to do is to compensate for this loss of inertia to purchase 230 megawatts of what they call fast reserve, which is a service that requires activation in 1 second, and that is symmetric. So it's very favorable to energy storage and especially battery storage systems. This is very similar to the enhanced frequency response tender that was launched in 2016 in the UK in terms of requirements. The big difference, though, is that the availability required for the systems is only 11% of the time. So it's 1,000 hours per year out of the 80,000 hours per year that are existing. So it means that the energy storage system has to find a lot of other revenue streams to make the business case work, because this fast reserve payment will only be for 11% of the time. And what Terna will do is that they will notify the assets that are awarded contracts 7 days ahead and will confirm 2 days ahead of activation. Right, Molly, we can go to the next slide, which is now a bit of news. So Italy is a bit like the new, it looks like the new UK with a capacity market and an enhanced frequency response product, but the UK is also moving on its end, as they announced, so the TSO in the UK, which is called National Grid, announced recently that they will procure in the first quarter of 2020 250 megawatts of dynamic containment, which is another sub-second response. So you're probably familiar with the enhanced frequency response. This one is similar, but has different envelopes and has different requirements. The deadband is very thin for the energy storage system. So what you can see here is the activation, static activation. And in terms of dynamic, it's 1 second delivery time. So once again, very favorable to energy storage. In the UK, there's currently, as we said in the beginning, around 700 megawatts of storage deployed. So we expect these bids to be very competitive. The auction will be weekly in the beginning, so very similar to what has happened in Europe for the past couple of years, and it is expected to be daily contracts in the future. So that means very low visibility for investors, and projects difficult to finance. That's why we expect existing projects to bid very low on this procurement. And today it's not allowed to stack this dynamic containment product with other products, but it will be in the future. Right, and it will be specifically designed, I mean, there will be specific rules for storage. I wanted to highlight a bit on the UK. What you can see on this slide is as more and more capacity is available, storage capacity is being installed, the frequency regulation markets are being saturated quite fast. And you've probably seen the firm frequency response prices price reduction. And the market is turning towards the next best thing to do, which is the balancing mechanism. And what I've illustrated on this slide is a battery in the UK, which has been installed last year, I think, from Aramco, which is trading solely on the balancing mechanism. Well, not solely actually. It's doing other things such as FFR and capacity market, but most of its activity is on the balancing mechanism. I've taken a random day, perfectly random, which you can see here, where we see the activation of national grid for this battery, and we can compute based on the bids, which are absolutely transparent, which is quite unique in the UK, a very transparent market, especially compared to France, where you can just see how much the battery makes. That takes me now to Germany, where there's been interesting news recently, because the TSOs have published their grid development plan, and they want to deploy in total 1.3 gigawatts of energy storage. Of course, this has to be first accepted and voted by the politics in Germany, but this also has to be accepted by the regulator, which, as you all know, is challenging for TSOs to own and operate battery storage systems. The reason for that being that the private sector is also willing to compete here, and is probably more competitive. So the TSOs will have to prove that it's not possible for them to contract, to create market conditions that will enable these batteries to be deployed. So either it's accepted as a test for these TSOs, Amprion, Tenet, to deploy these batteries to defer investment in the transmission grid, or it's going to be a marketplace. But in any case, it's very interesting to see the logic and the reasoning they came up about. It's all about making a better use of the network by ensuring N-1 conditions. In other words, a line which is usually used only at 50% of its capacity, in case something happens, the other line can take the missing 50%. What they can do by adding a battery at each end of the line is using the grid a lot more efficiently at up to 100%. And in case there's a failure on the line, the battery can fulfill the N-1 condition. And this, in terms of cost benefit analysis, this prevents curtailing renewables, and they have estimated the overall cost and the overall benefits, well, the storage system to be beneficial for the grid, essentially. Especially when you look at the cost of deploying another backbone like this from north to south in Germany, because most of the generation is currently shifting to the north with wind and the closing of the nuclear power plants, where most of the consumption is actually in the south. Right, so now I'll go to France, because Leader Associates have decided that France will be their market, and also because we think it's a very interesting market. We might have a small bias because we're based in France, but I'm sure you'd appreciate that. So I'll spend probably next 10 minutes explaining a bit what's the framework in France and what has happened. So what you can see here is a snapshot of the energy storage projects. You have most of the capacity actually today is deployed in the French islands, also called the non-interconnected zones, ZNI very often as you will find this is in acronym as an acronym in French. So the islands are Guadeloupe, Guyana, which is actually not an island. Guyana is part of the mainland, but from an electric perspective, it's not connected to any other countries. So it's an electrical island. Réunion, Martinique, Mayotte, and Corsica, which by the way is interconnected as well, but is considered as an island because the interconnection level is quite low. And then what you can see on the right-hand side is all the projects that are either announced or commissioned in France. So you have the projects, 2 new projects that provide frequency regulation, so the ones from Neoen and W Energy. The 2 projects from Renault and the project from Innovant announced are also intending to provide frequency regulation services, whereas the 3 RTE projects are part of the Ringo project, which is a demonstration project to defer the investment in grid assets. That's a bit a closer look on the Ringo projects because they are big. It's the biggest actually in mainland France today. So there are 3 of them, and they were awarded to French companies. So you get Nidec, which is one of the integrator champions in Europe. You've got Saft and Schneider integrating the Bellac project, and you've got Ventavon integrated by SFE, and the battery will be provided by Blue Solutions, which is the batteries, the solid-state batteries from Bolloré. This project is meant to defer investment in the grid. So the way it will be used is that, as you probably know, transmission system operators are not allowed to inject or withdraw electricity from the grid at any point in time. So these 3 batteries will have to be operated jointly so that the overall net injected capacity into the grid is 0. These batteries are located at points where there is a lot of renewable penetration and where RTE, the TSO, expects a lot of constraints to arise in the future. What's interesting with this project is that at the end of the experimentation, which will end in 2023, these projects will go commercial, which means that they will be essentially sold to third parties which can make better use of these projects because they can bring value from the ancillary services market and any other markets in which the TSO cannot participate by nature. And in the end, the objective of RTE is to create a marketplace for flexibility and for the TSO to operate flexibility assets on the transmission grid to prevent investments or defer investments in the transmission grid. And Enedis on its side is also leading such projects. We'll talk about it later. Right, so that was for the outlook. What you can see here is pictures, well, views actually more than pictures because they're not installed as of today, but they're currently being deployed, the 3 RTEs projects, so which will be the largest in continental France and which are not a market opportunity for independent power producers as of today, but might be back, well, in 2023. In 2023, sorry. Now I'll go towards, so we have a specific framework in French for the non-interconnected zones, and I'll tackle this in the couple next slides. We have a special RFP format for PV plus storage, whereby the operator has to forecast the operation of the power plant over the next day and has to provide ramp rate control and shift part of the production to the evening Actually, shifting part of the production is not mandatory, but there is a bonus of 200 euros per megawatt hour for the electricity shifted to the night time. So for those who are listening in from Asia, this is a bit similar to, in terms of principle on the bonus, to what's happened in Korea with the large PV plus storage plants, where there is a bonus for the renewable energy certificates for solar injected at night. It's not exactly the same framework, but it's the reason for PV to be shifted to the night time with batteries. Here, the injection period is smaller, so it's smaller batteries. It's only 2 hours blocks of peak time in the evening. And that's called very often, it's called the PV plus storage tenders in the French islands. Now, these procurements have been happening for the last 8 years, so it's quite a solid track record. And this is still this will still be deployed in the future, even though the regulator is not very happy with the idea of contracting storage built in the network with a PPA over the next 20 to 25 years. The second opportunity in the French islands is the second part of the slide. It's for wind plus storage. This tariff is still existing. However, it should disappear in the future, and the reason for that is because it's quite old. It's been set up in 2013, and the tariff of 230 euros per megawatt hour, which was set up back at the time, does not represent at all the current prices for wind and storage. The idea here is again very similar. It's for the independent power producer to have the ability to forecast its production on the next day and stay within, I think it's 10 to 20% of the forecast production within the day. But this is a fading out opportunity, the wind plus storage project. PV plus storage, however, if you go to the next slide, is a recurrent business, and an auction has been held lately last year. And so that's all the auctions from 2011. And you can see that there is another one which will be held in June 2020. The volumes are already defined. So you have the volumes of PV here, but there are rules for storage which require 0.5 megawatts of storage per megawatt of PV and 0.5 megawatt hour of storage per megawatt of PV. So this is good. As you can see, the deadlines are also shortening. So the timing between announcement, award, and timing for the project to be completed are shorter and shorter. So now it's quite stabilized, but it's a good recurring auction and business for PV and storage in France. Next, actually in France, I was saying that the regulator was not very happy with these PV plus storage auctions, and the reason for that is because part of the capacity is locked in a contract, which might not be the best use case for storage in the future years. So what the regulator has developed is instead of having distributed storage, well, at least storage operated in a distributed manner, is to centralize the operation of storage to make it more efficient. So they have developed two services, one which is frequency regulation and the other one which is arbitrage. And they have put an open tender for storage to provide these two services in the various French islands, and they would lead a cost-benefit analysis for each of the islands and each of the projects depending on their costs. And this is something that has already been awarded once, and we've got the Mayotte projects that were awarded end of last year. So we expect new of these auctions to be of these centralized storage auctions, because in this case it's only storage, there's no PV, to happen in the future as well. Then I will go back to the mainland, because that's all about the opportunities in the islands. And on the mainland, we have an opportunity which is shared with other countries, which is called Frequency Containment Reserve, FCR, also called primary reserve sometimes. And this service is a service which is a really good fit for storage. If you remember the beginning of the slide, I was mentioning that more than 300 megawatts of storage are deployed in Germany. All of this capacity today provide this frequency containment reserve service. And in France, we joined the market back in 2017, but the conditions for storage to participate were only published in 2019. And now some projects have been installed. You've seen them as well to provide FCR. However, the volumes that you see on this slide is the purchasing volumes and the exchange limits from a country to another. This is based on a European rule of 3 gigawatts of FCR to be provided. This is the amount of reserve we need to carry in case something goes wrong on the system, and it's shared amongst the countries depending on their production and consumption. And what you can see here is that the two largest markets for FCR are France and Germany, because they actually have the biggest consumption. Actually, what happens is that all the countries share this auction with the export limit that you can see. Right, so this is an opportunity and a service very well fit to storage. What I'm showing on the next slide is the different tolerance from a TSO to another. There is today several rules for storage to participate, and ENSOE is actually currently deliberating to know, to unify these rules, especially in terms of storage duration between 15 and 30 minutes. And what you can see here is that the French TSO is the one that provides the most flexibility in its gain. So the gain is essentially the amount of surplus power that you're allowed to withdraw or inject in the grid. So the requirement, the common FCR product, requires all countries to inject the maximum power for a 200 millihertz deviation. But the French TSO enables you to provide more regulating power. And the result of this is actually that you can better manage your state of charge. So that's actually a good thing for France. But however, so all of this is very interesting, but the issue that this market is showing is that the prices are reducing. So what you see here is the FCR marginal prices for the past 2 years, because it starts from 2017, 3 years even. And what you can see is that the price, or the payment for storage participating in this auction is reducing. So there was a bit of a seasonal shift before, and what you can see is that from 1st of July 2019, the format of the auction has changed from a weekly auction to a daily auction. And we've changed from pay as bid to pay as clear. So in other words, everyone gets paid what the marginal asset gets paid. And this, the fact that the revenues decrease means that the energy storage systems have to find complementary revenues. And we are currently putting a lot of thoughts of the reason for these market prices to decrease. France has hit for the first time a zero closing price. That was 2 weeks ago. So it means that this market is very competitive. It means that there is also a couple of stakeholders which have very vast amount of capacity that they place on these markets, and that they are currently bidding at very low levels. What's interesting is since the 1st of July, we can now see the bid ladder, which shows how much each of the stakeholders have as a marginal price to provide this service. So we can guess a lot more on the strategy and who is acting and for what reason. On the next slide, I'm showing a typical business case for a battery storage system in Europe. which of course changes from a market to another because the conditions are not the same. But essentially, FCR provides the bulk of the revenues. Today, it depends a lot on how much you forecast. So this business case was established by us last year. Of course, this would probably have to be revised depending on the FCR revenue, which is now expected to be lower than what it used to be. But there is, in any case, a secondary revenue, which needs to be a capacity market, arbitrage on the wholesale market, or secondary reserve. And then you have all the project costs on the other side, and you can see that it's depending on your assumptions and how you build your project and the economics and how much it costs in terms of development, in terms of grid connection, you can get positive business case. If I now go a bit more towards the change, what has changed, I was discussing this briefly, but essentially what you can see on this slide is the decrease of the FCR price a bit more in detail for the past year. And you can see also at the bottom of the slide what has changed from marginal pricing to pay as clear. So from a pay as bid to pay as clear. What changes in the stakeholders' behavior is that when changing from pay as bid to pay as clear, the stakeholder is awarded the price of the marginal assets. So the one with where you can see the dotted lines in the marginal pricing, whereas in the pay as bid, each stakeholder is awarded the payment for what it has bid. So what's happening now is that stakeholders bid zero, which they would have never done in the beginning with a pay as bid, otherwise they would have been paid zero. So they know, now it's a lot more transparent. We know a lot more and understand a lot more on how these markets are shaped up, because stakeholders do not have to guess the price of the marginal asset. Rather, what they are doing is simply bidding their marginal price of providing FCR. So we make our own forecast on this, and we are happy to discuss how this can evolve. It's of course a very big subject, but I think it now has to be accepted also that this FCR revenue needs to represent less and less of the portion of the revenues for a storage system in Europe, and that the other revenues need to be seriously considered, such as a balancing mechanism, secondary reserve, and arbitrage. Right, so if I go now to my last part, which is what will change in the future, we are expecting actually today the results of the long-term tender for the capacity market auction for 7 years. We will be, later this year, have ENEDIS, so the French DSO, main DSO, and the TSO to publish their constraints on the grid, their congestions. In 2021, the balancing market should be open to energy storage. Secondary reserve is expected to be soon accessible in France. So it's been lately set up as of 2023, but it's considered to be moved up into 2021. And in 2024, as we mentioned earlier, RTE plans on having these flexibility services with the batteries that are currently experimenting today. Right, so that's a lot of excitement both for France and for the rest of Europe of new opportunities for batteries. And so in Italy, France, Germany, and the UK. So that's pretty much it for the content of this webinar. I'll go now to the questions that were raised. Molly, if you can show the slide. I think we've selected 9 or 10.
We have 10 in total.
Okay, so I'll take them in order. First question is, which battery cost would lead to increase the battery storage market in Europe? I'd answer to that the energy storage market in Europe is already increasing. We expect in 2025 approximately 3 gigawatts of storage to be deployed. Actually, no, even more than that, 4.5 gigawatts of storage to be deployed. So it's already increasing, and the battery prices are decreasing and driving the expansion of this market. So that's already something happening. And as the further the prices drop, the more business case can be unlocked, and the more storage will be deployed. Question 2 is, which are the battery technology trends to support this business? So as of today in Europe, there are a couple of projects which are not electrochemical storage, but 99 or 98% of the projects are electrochemical storage, and by electrochemical, the vast majority is lithium-ion battery storage system. As of today, because it's the most competitive solution to provide the frequency regulation services, essentially. In the future, we expect this the standard duration to move from 1 or 2 hours. Well, it's currently probably around 1 hour, to move towards 2 hours or 3 hours. So this could probably favor other technologies, even though they would have to beat battery storage system prices. How to tackle uncertainties? This is a great question, and I would really like to chat with you on this. There's a lot of possibilities, but as you probably understood, there is indeed a lot of uncertainties in Europe because the bulk of the revenues come from a market, so it's merchant revenues, be it FCR in France or FFR in the UK, or any other types of mechanisms. So I think the key here, there are two ways to tackle uncertainties. The first way is to stack as many revenues as possible. So we've mentioned the revenues from the distribution system operator with its flexibility platform. We've mentioned the opening to secondary reserve. So one thing is to have to stack revenue streams as much as possible to hedge the risk. The other thing is to build storage power plants that are flexible, because we know how a battery makes money today, but we don't really know what's going to happen in the next 10 years. The regulations change fast, and we highly recommend our customers to build a flexible storage system which can adapt to the changing regulatory framework and incentives. Next question is challenges and opportunities for Chinese companies. Very good question. I think the challenges, there's several. For instance, I think of the French islands, which are a very specific market. The main challenge here would be to get access to the land, to get into the marketplace. I think Chinese companies can be are very competitive in terms of storage projects. What misses in the project I've seen is a strong integrator partner who can ensure that all the regulatory framework that is in France and all the regulations can be met by someone who knows how to deal with them and the regulatory framework. So I think that's one very good way to overcome the regulatory challenge, or just the fact that these companies are far from what's happening here. The next question is regarding the development of storage project. How much is being installed in front of the meter and behind the meter? Today, the only country where there is really utility-scale storage systems behind the meter is the UK. There is a lot of interest also in other countries such as Germany and France, but it's more difficult to develop these projects because it's based on the acceptance of the commercial or industrial customers, which is difficult to manage, whereas the developer is free at any point in time to develop a storage project in front of the meter. So there is more front of the meter today, but we expect some behind the meter projects to be deployed as well, because the same revenues are accessible and there is very often less cost. The main obstacles for storage in Europe? That's a good question. I'd say the uncertainties today, the uncertainties of the remuneration, the uncertainties related to the regulatory frameworks. And probably the main obstacle in Europe is that we have today, except in the UK, we don't have a fundamental need for storage because we don't have. I mean, there are needs, but it's a frequency regulation need, so we don't need storage. What we need is a service. So I'd say the main obstacle is a change in the way we also consume electricity. We produce electricity because if you look at the continental grid, most of the electricity production comes from conventional sources and not renewables. So as renewables get a higher share in the penetration in the generation, we will see more and more challenges come, just like what happened in the UK with issues on inertia, on system stability. Residential storage is the next question. So this is a market that is established in Germany for the past 3 to 4 years. So with strong governmental incentives and for battery storage system with PV for self-consumption. The market is also existing in the UK because the electricity prices in Germany and in the UK are relatively high. So there is a market for residential storage. As of today, in France, it's not very well developed, so it's quite, it's very dependent on two things. One is the regulation, and second is the electricity market price. I'm now at question 8, which is the ultimate role of energy storage in the broader EU energy system. So that's a good question. I think storage core value is flexibility, and flexibility is valued on the ancillary services and on the balancing mechanisms and on the wholesale markets. Today, the wholesale markets in Europe, well, especially in France and Germany, are not that exciting for storage because the spreads are not so high. But its ultimate role is to provide flexibility with ancillary services and arbitrage on the energy markets. Plus, I think really the opportunity of deferring investment in the grid, which is really something that is very interesting because the amount of energy, the amounts of money that are invested into the transmission and distribution assets in Europe are great. Please comment on the French primary FCR closed at 0. So yeah, I've discussed it very briefly in the slide, but indeed, so the FCR market globally across 6 countries has not closed to 0, but the French auction closed to 0, and the reason for that is that everyone has essentially all the companies that were selected in the auction had bid 0. This should not happen again because no one wants to be paid. No one wants to provide a service and be paid 0 to provide this service. So you have probably seen, if you looked at the bid ladder since this took place, that now the major stakeholders in this FCR auction, most of which is nuclear, hydro, have changed their bidding strategies so that they are not awarded 0. So it can remain very low, but it shouldn't close to 0 again, as it is in the interest of no one to be paid 0 to provide a service. And then the ultimate question is, what type of storage technology is France supporting? That's a good question. I think France is not currently supporting a lot of storage technologies. We've recently launched with Europe the Energy Storage Alliance, which is the hubs of batteries, essentially. And there's a factory for staff built in the south of France. But this is not for stationary storage. This is mostly for the electric vehicle industry. So I don't think... Actually, France is not supporting any specific technology today. Europe has just gathered around building some of the electric vehicle industry to compete with the Asian industry, or to try and compete, I should say. And yeah, I think that's it for the question. I don't know, Molly, do you want to bring up some questions from the audience that we received during the webinar?
Yes, I think we do have one question. I won't say his name. So the question is, would it be possible to, oh, okay, that's not really a question, but a compliment. They want to have your slides. Okay, so just to reinforce that the recording as well as the presentation slides will be shared with all of you through email by the end of this week. And if you have any other questions related to the webinar, or do you want to raise furthermore questions, you please feel free to write to me at Molly at leaderassociates.com. My email address will be shared with you later as well. So that's just the response to the only one questions now in the studio. Okay. I think there'll be more, might be in the emails later.
Great. Okay. Happy to answer.
Yeah, thank you so much, Corentin, for the very informative presentation and your kind address on the submitted questions. We definitely start to see a lot of excitement about batteries coming for various reasons, and we hope that more concrete projects could be taken off in the coming days. Some further information about our upcoming event, the second Europe Solar Plus Energy Storage Congress, whose website link is listed as below. If you're interested in joining us, please feel free to sign up through online registration channel or offline assistance. Me and my colleague Kami will be there to help should you have any questions. And apart from this webinar, there will be more quality contents produced by Leader Associates in the coming days, including market white paper, newsletter, and offline B2B meetings. So we anticipate the webinar to be around 40 to 50 minutes, and I think now we are almost running out of time. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I think we are all good here.
Thank you,
please
Molly.
Stay tuned. Thank you.
And also maybe just saying to the audience, we're glad to be in this webinar, and we look forward to all see you at a Leader Associates conference in France, for which the early bird is before end of March. So we look forward to discussing storage this summer with you in France in June.
Yes, please stay tuned, and I'll see you all next time. Have a great day to you.
Thank you. Bye.